You know, Ipperwash, subject of controversy. 4 decades ago, there was a barrier put up around a provincial park there, and just this past week, it was struck down. And controversy continues around Ipperwash. Rebecca Thompson joins us because you actually know this area very well.
Yeah, I grew up in this area, so I'm well acquainted of where this beach is. It's Lake Huron. This is just north of Sarnia, a little past London, Ontario. And essentially the story here is that this week there's been a brush up between the First Nations and the local community, including the local council and the mayor, because of the fact that the First Nations are claiming that they would like access to drive along the beachfront. And what you just saw there on the map is the red line, what is the existing road access that First Nations and the general community at large can drive along to get from one point to the other. On the very one side of your screen there on the right side is where Ipperwash Provincial Park, which had existed since 1936 until 1995, almost 60 years. This was originally First Nations territory. There was a controversy that happened in 1995 where the Ontario Provincial Police fatally shot one of the First Nations community in the First Nations community as attempt to take back this land. Well, they now have this land. They also have beachfront access, but the rest of the community there the rest of the beachfront there is public access. The community is extremely up in arms, extremely frustrated, because along this public access is where thousands and thousands of people go every summer to swim and to play sports and to have picnics. And so they're frustrated.
But it's not First Nations land.
There's no claim on this particular land.
Oh.
What the First Nations, the Stony Point and Kettle Point Reserve, claim is that this was a historic trail that they would move along, walk along. You know, previous to 1930, of course, they may have had access to vehicles, but likely didn't drive their vehicles along the beachfront. But today, of course, they all have vehicles. They want access not to just walk along the beachfront back and forth from the Kettle Point Reserve to now Camp Ipperwash, which was traditionally the Stony Point Reserve, but they want to drive their vehicles.
How far is the road away from that beach, though? I mean, is it 5–10 miles, or is it 500 feet?
It's 50 feet.
50 feet?
50 feet.
And okay, so this is revisionist history that makes it more convenient for them to go along the beach.
But this is what is rather absurd about the whole thing, is that they can drive along the roadway just as everybody can drive along the roadway. As you see, the red line represents the various roadways that they can drive along to get from one point to the next. So the idea that they have to drive their vehicles right along the beachfront is something that is rather confusing to the general public. Now,
okay, would the general public get a ticket if they drove their vehicle on the beach?
Well, previously you couldn't, so this is why the barriers were put up in the early 1970s. You know, the First Nations community were not consulted in the early 1970s when these barriers went up, although technically the land didn't belong to them. The province decided to put the barriers up so that nobody could drive along the beach, that it would be shared public beach for everybody to have. There's also, you know, probably about 100 cottages who back onto this public beach, and the worry and frustration for them is that the First Nations will claim, you know, if this is a historic trail, then they should also extend it into their homes.
Their properties.
Their properties. So there's, you know, there's speculation and frustration and the First Nations community says, as of today, well, look, we notified the council, the community council months ago that we were hoping to take down these barriers and establish this historic trail for driving. We don't know actually what the real story is. This Friday, there's going to be a big meeting between the province, the First Nations community, the local council and community members to try to solve this. Ever since this fatal accident fatal shooting in 1995, where a member of the First Nation was killed.
Dudley George, right?
Dudley George. The community has tried to work together to come up with this long-term plan on how to, how to ensure that there's a community, everybody in the community can benefit from this entire area.
Hotheads with the First Nations, or why all of a sudden cause a fight?
Well, that's the big question. Why all of a sudden cause a fight? And so the big question is what the province is going to do about it, because ultimately the province, and this is provincial territory, will have the final say as to what will happen. However, as we know, with Caledonia, in the fact that this is Ipperwash and that this brush up happened, and the Ontario government's track record for appeasing First Nations community when they, for example, illegally sit on railways. I am concerned that the province is just going to allow the First Nations to drive their vehicles in an unsafe way along the beachfront.
Justifiable concern. Rebecca, great to have you here, though.
Thank you.